Hi there, I'm a self-appointed moral guardian. Shopping for music?
Yeah.
May I help you make your selections?
Dude, I can buy my own music.
Yes, but thanks to a strict personal moral code, I'm able to protect you from yourself. For example, this band is suspected of promoting Satanism, so you can't have them. We're not sure of the sexuality of this singer, so put that back. The lyrical themes of this group could be misinterpreted, so they're out. Oh, look, a parental advisory sticker. That's definitely a no-no.
Well, what is your problem?
Based solely on my opinions, I have taken it upon myself to protect people from the evils of music.
So you're into censorship?
No, not at all. I'm just helping to educate consumers of popular music. Put that CD down. The singer said a bad word on TV, so we're running a boycott against him. In fact, you might as well just leave the store because there's nothing here that's any good for you.
So you made this decision?
That's right. Thanks to my strict, narrow view of the world, I am able to impinge on your freedoms of choice and speech, but you'll thank me later.
Dude, you need help.
Yeah, I do. But there's a lot more of us out there. Take a listen to this.
Now, the ongoing history of new music.
That's great, it starts with an earthquake, birds and snakes, an airplane. Lenny Bruce is not afraid. I have a hurricane, listen to yourself, churn, world serves its own needs, dummy serve your own needs, beat it up and knock, speak, grunt, no strength, the ladder starts to clatter with fear, fight down, high wire in a fire, represented 7 games in a government for hire in a combat site. Left to us and coming in a hurry with the furies breathing down your neck. Team my team reporters babble Trump, tether crop, look at that, no plane, fine, then, overflow, population common food, but it'll do, save yourself, serve yourself, world serves its own needs, listen to your heartbeat, dummy with the rapture and the reverend and the right, you patriotic, slam, fight, bright, light, feeling, pretty sight. It's the end of the world as we know it. It's the end of the world as we know it. It's the end of the world as we know it. And I feel fine. 6 o'clock TV hour, no get caught in foreign tower, slice and burn, return, listen to yourself churn, locking in uniform and book, burning blood, letting every motive escalate, automotive incinerate, light a candle, light a motor, step down, watch your heel, crush, this means no fear, cavalier, renegade, steer clear, a tournament of lies, offer me solutions, offer me alternatives, and I decline. It's the end of the world as we know it. It's the end of the world as we know it. It's the end of the world as we know it. I feel fine. It's the end of the world as we know it. It's the end of the world as we know it. It's the end of the world as we know it. I feel fine. The other night I drifted nice, continental drift divide, mountain sit in a line, Leonard Bernstein, Leonard Brezhnev, Lenny Bruce and Lester Banks, birthday party, cheesecake, jelly bean, boom, symbiotic, patriotic, slam button, that's right. It's the end of the world as we know it. It's the end of the world as we know it. It's the end of the world as we know it. I feel fine. It's the end of the world as we know it. It's the end of the world as we know it. It's the end of the world as we know it. And I feel fine. It's the end of the world as we know it. It's the end of the world as we know it. It's the end of the world as we know it. And I feel fine. It's the end of the world as we know it. It's the end of the world as we know it. It's the end of the world
Welcome to the show. I'm Alan Cross, and this is the second half of a show I call Fear of Music. And you might be wondering what that REM song has to do with things like censorship and the evils of rock music. Well, I'll tell you. After the attacks of September the 11th, that song was on a list circulated by a massive U.S. radio chain as one that might be too much of a downer for its audiences. There were 158 songs on that list, which included tracks like Sabotage by the Beastie Boys, Burning Down the House by the Talking Heads, and even New York, New York by Frank Sinatra. Now, granted, it was a strange time for us all, but this list was a great example of fear of music. The most basic definition of censorship is all about supervising and passing judgment upon the behavior, manners, or morality of others. You know what I mean? You can't say that. You can't do that. You can't sing that because, well, we have some very good reasons. Everyone knows that music is a powerful, powerful thing. It can affect our emotions, our psyches, and in extreme cases, our souls. And because of that, there are those who believe music is dangerous and needs to be carefully supervised and in some cases regulated by those who, I guess, have humanity's best interests at heart. They, rightly or wrongly, fear music. And in many cases, they choose to blame the messenger, attacking the singer or the song, instead of looking deeper to find out why people are feeling this way or thinking these things. Societal and political change is often preceded by messages and movements in pop culture. Those in charge hope that by blocking the message and restricting the movements of the messengers, that they can stop or maybe even reverse change. The morality police have been around a lot longer than Janet Jackson's wardrobe malfunction at the Super Bowl. Back in 399 BC, Socrates, the great Greek philosopher, was condemned for corrupting the youth of Athens by teaching them concepts of individuality. One of his pupils, Plato, became a major proponent of censorship because what his teacher taught him scared him so much. Is that too far back for you? Well, in the 30s, Hollywood established the production code, which outlined what could and could not be shown in movies. You couldn't show, for example, the udders of a cow because they were deemed potentially offensive. In the first half of the 20th century, blues and jazz were attacked by the establishment. When rock was born in the 50s, many authorities went completely nuts. Parents and politicians and even doctors got involved. Let me give you a 1957 quote from a Dr. Braceland, a psychiatrist at a facility in Connecticut. Speaking on rock music, he said rock was a cannibalistic and tribalistic form of music that was a communicable disease, appealing to adolescent insecurity and driving teenagers to do outlandish things. Pablo Casals, the famous classical cellist, called rock music poison put to sound. Not surprisingly, certain songs were banned by individual radio stations, including this track by a guy named Link Wray. It was banned because it sounded dangerous. It's an instrumental. But here's the all-time best story about rock and roll censorship. In 1963, a garage band from Portland, Oregon recorded a song called Louie Louie. They spent $50 making this recording. For that price, all they could afford was a single overhead microphone dangling about 10 feet above the band. Singer Jack Eli had to bend his neck all the way back and sing kind of like straight up. It also didn't help that he was wearing a big set of braces on his teeth at the time. So no wonder no one could make out what this guy was singing. Sounds harmless enough, right? But back in 1963, Louie Louie by the Kingsmen created a national scandal in the United States. Rumors began to spread that the lyrics were unbelievably dirty. The governor of Indiana imposed a statewide ban on the song. He said it was so dirty it made his ears tingle. Seriously, that's what he said. It makes my ears tingle. Complaints from parents and teachers and preachers reached all the way to the office of the U.S. Attorney General. J. Edgar Hoover of the FBI was given the awesome responsibility of investigating the matter. People were questioned, and the song was examined at a variety of speeds in the FBI labs, both forwards and backwards. This investigation lasted 2 years. It wasn't until the final FBI report came out on May 25th, 1965, a report that was 118 pages long, by the way, that the lyrics to Louie Louie were declared to be unintelligible at any speed. Okay, that's a little more history on the subject. Let's look at some modern examples of attempts at censorship based on fear and misunderstandings. In 1978, a new band out of England called The Cure released a single called Killing an Arab. Singer Robert Smith, a 19-year-old misfit who was going through a bit of a trendy art school phase, based the song on an existential novel by the great French-Algerian writer Albert Camus. The novel was called L'Étranger, which in this case translates as The Foreigner. In the book, the main character senselessly kills an Arab man he does not know while wandering out in the desert. The book goes on to describe his emotional crisis and the existentialist confusion about the meaninglessness of life. Camus went on to win the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1957. This book is a French classic. And for Killing an Arab, Robert Smith essentially wrote a précis of the novel. Think of it as a musical book report. See, back in 1978, themes of nihilism and futility were everywhere in punk rock, so L'Étranger's themes fit in nicely. However, as Robert soon found out, few people have ever read Camus, and the song was condemned around the world for being racist and is something that incited violence against Arab people. But before we go any further, let me play you the song so we can put everything in context. This is The Cure and Killing an Arab.
Standing on the beach with a gun in my hand, staring at the sea, staring at the sand, staring down the barrel at the Arab on the ground. The sea is open mouth, but I hear no sound. I'm alive. I'm dead. I'm the stranger killing an Arab. I can turn and walk away, or I can fire the gun. Staring at the sky, staring at the sun. Whichever I choose, it amounts to the same. Absolutely nothing. I'm alive. I'm dead. I'm the stranger killing an Arab. Jump, smooth in my hand, staring at the sea, staring at the sand, staring at myself, reflected in the eyes of the dead man on the beach. I'm alive. I'm dead. I'm the stranger killing an Arab.
The Cure, with their summary of the Albert Camus novel L'Étranger. That was their debut single from December 1978, and since then, the song has been a firestorm of misunderstanding and accusations. It seems that every time there's an issue with the Middle East, Killing an Arab gets misinterpreted as a hate song. And it didn't take long. Like I said, the single came out in December 1978. The first riot, started by a racist British organization called the National Front, took place at a Cure show in London in February of 1979. From that point on, racist wackos worldwide used the song to further their own agenda. Meanwhile, those opposed to racism singled out the song as a tool of evil. In 1986, almost 7 years after the song was recorded, the Arab American Anti-Discrimination Committee suddenly discovered the song and began making complaints about it. Pressure got so intense that The Cure asked radio stations to stop playing the song. It was all very, very weird. Here's Robert Smith on the whole Killing an Arab controversy.
I regret having titled it Killing an Arab. Yeah, I think that was the biggest mistake I made as a young man. But the song was written and titled long, long before we even had a record deal. I mean, it was just, I was kind of screaming, I was shouting. I have no regrets about writing the song because it's a good précis of a great book. But the title has been the bane of my life from time to time. It's kind of re-emerged again like in the last few months. It's kind of... There's always some idiot will kind of pick up on the title and start playing it and go, hey, I suppose if that's the one thing I regret, that's the one thing I regret.
Robert Smith of The Cure. Here's another example of hysterical misunderstanding. In 1984, the Smiths released a single called Heaven Knows I'm Miserable Now, and on the B-side was a song called Suffer Little Children. This was based on a series of gruesome child murders that took place in the Smiths' hometown of Manchester back in the 1960s. Ian Brady and Myra Hindley worked together at a chemical company. After they started dating, they murdered 5 young people between the ages of 10 and 17. Most of the bodies were dumped in the countryside east of the city, which is why the case became known as the Moors Murders. Ian and Myra were eventually caught after a long search, and needless to say, it was one of the biggest stories in the history of Manchester. Both were sent to jail, and Myra Hindley is still called the most hated woman in Britain. Morrissey, as we said, a native of Manchester and a singer for the Smiths, was fascinated by the case and wrote the song Suffer Little Children to mourn the victims. Now keep in mind that he did this almost 2 decades after the case was solved. But one evening, a relative of one of the murdered children was in the pub having a few pints when someone went over to the jukebox and punched up a song, which just happened to be Suffer Little Children. The relative was outraged by what he heard and called a local Manchester newspaper, which in turn turned everything into a front-page story. The fallout was, well, massive. Large chain stores banned both the single and the Smiths' debut album. Parents of the murdered children were in the paper, on TV, and on the radio accusing the Smiths of sensationalizing and profiting from their pain and tragedy. The Smiths were shocked at being so misinterpreted. Morrissey wrote letters to the parents and called them on the phone apologizing for the misunderstanding. Eventually, though, things did work out. Even the relative who had heard the song in the pub had to admit that Suffer Little Children wasn't really that offensive at all. And anyway, the story has a happy ending. The Smiths even went so far as to donate some of the royalties from Suffer Little Children to charity.
Over the moor, take me to the moor. Dig a shallow grave and I'll lay me down. Over the moor, take me to the moor. Dig a shallow grave and I'll lay me down. Leslie Ann and your pretty white beads. Oh John, you'll never be a man, and you'll never see your home again. Oh Manchester, so much to answer for. Edward, see those alluring lights. Tonight will be your very last night. A woman said, I know my son is dead. I'll never rest my hands on his sacred head. Hindley wakes and Hindley stays. Hindley wakes, Hindley wakes, Hindley wakes and stays. Oh, wherever he has gone, I have gone. But fresh lilac, moorland fields cannot hide the stolid stench of death.
and the once banned Suffer Little Children. More fear of music coming up next, including what happens when governments get all bent out of shape. And this will be fun. No, I mean, really, this will be fun.
You're tuned to the ongoing history of new music. This is the ongoing history of new music.
Governments often display a fear of music. On part 1 of this program, we talked about how nations from Afghanistan to Japan to Malaysia to the UK have all had their freakouts when it comes to music. Here are a few more examples. In March 2003, more than a dozen metal musicians and fans were arrested, tried, and jailed in Morocco. Their crime was being metal musicians and fans. 14 guys, all between the ages of 22 and 35, were convicted of acts capable of undermining the faith of a Muslim and possessing objects which infringe morals. Authorities had been tipped off of the existence of metal fans through a series of newspaper articles which branded these people as Satanists. And the presiding judge seemed to agree. Here's a quote from the trial. "Normal people go to concerts in a suit and tie," he said. That came up after most of the accused showed up in court wearing black T-shirts. He was also very upset that most of the musicians involved preferred to write their songs in English rather than Arabic. All 14 men were sent to jail for periods ranging from 1 month to 1 year. Still with the Middle East, the Chords is a band from Beirut, Lebanon that was formed in 1992. In 2003, they were summoned to appear before Beirut's Office of Anti-Terrorism and Important Crimes. Really, that's the name of the office. They were there for 4.5 hours of interrogation about their musical motives. Questions included, do you play hard rock like Metallica? And do your fans worship the devil? At the end of it all the members of the Chords were forced to sign a statement that read, and this is a quote, "We do not now, nor have we, nor will we ever play for the devil, even if someone asks us to." And here's one more. It is a federal offense to bring U2 albums into Myanmar, which is what the generals call Burma these days. Anyone caught bringing in a copy of All That You Can't Leave Behind could face up to 20 years in prison. The record is completely banned because of the song Walk On, which was inspired by Daw Aung San Suu Kyi, the freedom activist who is the biggest thorn in the side of the military junta. Walk On is dedicated to her and the democracy movement in Myanmar. In fact, all items which make reference to her are banned. So, be forewarned. If you're ever on your way to Rangoon, leave U2's All That You Can't Leave Behind, leave it behind.
And love is not the easy thing, the only baggage that you can bring. Love.
Darkness is to keep us apart, and if the daylight feels like it's a long way on, and if your glass heart should crack for a second, you turn back. Oh no. Be strong. Walk on. You got they can't steal it. No, they can't even feel it. Walk on. Stay safe tonight. You're packing a suitcase for a place none of us has been, a place that has to be believed to be seen. You could have flown away, a singing bird in an open cage. Who will
U2 in a song that will get you arrested and quite possibly tortured in Burma. If that's too much of a downer for you, here's some good news. On the last program, we made the connection between rock and freedom in the Czech Republic and Slovakia. You can draw a straight line between American groups like the Velvet Underground and Czech president and former rock lyricist Václav Havel and the so-called Velvet Revolution. You can also credit rock with bringing freedom to Hungary. In the fall of 2003, András Simony, the Hungarian ambassador to the United States, stood up in front of a meeting of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and told everyone how important rock music was to ending communism. Here's what he said. By keeping in touch with the music scene in the West, it kind of kept me sane with the feeling I was part of the free world. This guy now wants to establish a Hungarian institute for the study of rock's influences on politics. The Berlin Wall came down in 1989. Hungary embraced democracy in 1990. They joined NATO in 1999, and on May 1, 2004, they became a member of the European Union. And to hear the ambassador talk, this march to freedom would have never, ever happened without rock music. Now, this song has been used for too many TV commercials over the last decade, so it's understandable if everyone has forgotten its original intent, which was the celebration of the fall of the Berlin Wall and the Iron Curtain in 1989. This is Jesus Jones. As we saw with issues in Iran, Iraq, Morocco, Lebanon, Malaysia, and other countries, music is feared because it's perceived as a threat to the prevailing religious orthodoxy. And North America is not immune to this. Take the case of Evanescence. Prior to the release of the Fallen album, the band was huge on the Christian rock scene. They were played on Christian radio stations, featured on Christian music charts, and sold in Christian music stores. And based on some very uplifting religious comments made to a series of magazines through 2002, Evanescence were looked upon as a nice, God-fearing bunch of kids from Little Rock, Arkansas. But then came an Entertainment Weekly article in early April 2003 where guitarist Ben Moody used the F-bomb and took some names in vain a couple of times. The uproar was, shall we say, substantial. And within days, the actual date is April 10th, 2003, the owner of Wind Up Records, the group's record label, officially recalled all Evanescence product from all Christian stores and Christian radio stations. He apologized for, quote, misrepresenting the artist to the Christian community. He went on to say, I apologize for what has become an unfortunate and embarrassing situation. While I cannot go back and undo what has been done, going forward we will scrutinize our Christian artists' beliefs and commitment with even greater diligence. I will personally inform all of our future artists who represent themselves as Christian artists and wish to be represented in the Christian community that in doing so they must understand the lasting and ongoing commitment that involves. By June 30th, 2003, almost every Christian store in the world had removed all traces of Evanescence product.
How can you see into my eyes like open doors, leading you down into my core, where I become so numb?
Evanescence, banned in Christendom. Or in Christian music stores, anyway. Coming up, the whole hysteria behind parental advisory stickers and the fallout of Boobygate. Hang on tight.
You're tuned to the ongoing history of new music. This is the ongoing history of new music.
Both the public's mood and the political climate go in cycles. Society goes from being uptight to various degrees of permissiveness and liberalism. Then something comes along to snap it violently back to the right. For example, at the end of the 1970s, the me decade and the era of punk and new wave and disco and decadent rock superstars like Led Zeppelin and the Stones, and after 4 years of Jimmy Carter, life in the U.S. took a sharp turn to the right with the election of Ronald Reagan. This was followed by one of the greatest fear of music scares of all time, with something known as the Parents Music Resource Group, otherwise known as the PMRC. It all began when Tipper Gore, wife of Al Gore, took her daughter shopping, and she came home with a copy of Prince's Purple Rain album. Later, Tipper was shocked to hear her daughter listening to one particularly vile track called Darling Nikki. Now, Tipper couldn't believe her ears and decided that she needed to do something about all this filth. She got together with Susan Baker, wife of the Treasury Secretary, Nancy Thurmond, wife of the ultra-right senator from the South, Strom Thurmond, and almost 24 other wives of the power elite in Washington. And that's how the PMRC was born. Over the next few years, the PMRC launched an offensive against music, concentrating on what became known as the Filthy 15. On that list was the aforementioned Prince, along with Black Sabbath, Motley Crue, and Sheena Easton. Yes, I said Sheena Easton. There were public hearings and congressional committees, and even a book by Tipper called Raising a Child in an X-Rated Society. And the fallout was huge. For example, the mayor of San Antonio's eyes were opened, and he passed a bylaw forbidding people 14 and under from attending rock concerts. A similar law was passed in Memphis. In Seattle, they had something called the Teenage Dance Ordinance to regulate underage shows. And in New Iberia, Louisiana, they passed some kind of a law that was supposed to keep objectionable music away from, listen to this, unmarried people under the age of 17. Let me just read that again. Keep objectionable music away from unmarried people under the age of 17. So yeah, you did hear me right. Eventually, Americans saw a new federal U.S. law called the Child Protection and Obscenity Enforcement Act. This was 1988. And in 1990, the infamous parental advisory stickers appeared on albums. They became known as Tipper stickers, but that's not really fair because, see, Tipper may have started the PMRC, but the sticker was the invention of Stanley M. Gortikov, the president of the Recording Industry Association of America. Stanley got the letter from Tipper and her crew asking for an X rating on albums with sexually explicit lyrics. They also asked that certain musicians not be allowed to record in the first place. Now, to Stanley's credit, he rejected most of the PMRC's demands as impractical and a violation of the American First Amendment, which is the one that deals with free speech. As a compromise, he came up with the parental advisory stickers. Those stickers are still in use today, and strangely enough, it's the stores that are held responsible if they sell a stickered CD to a minor. For example, one guy in Seattle got busted for selling the Frank Zappa album Jazz from Hell to a kid. Now, that was weird because this was an instrumental album with exactly 0 explicit lyrics. Or lyrics, period. So strange. Here are the Foo Fighters with their version of the song that started it all with Tipper Gore and her daughter. This is Darling Nikki.
Say she was a sex fiend. I met her in a hotel lobby, masturbating with a magazine. She said, how'd you like to waste some time? And I could not resist when I saw little Nikki cry. Couldn't believe my eyes. She had so many devices, everything that money could buy. She said, sign your name on the dotted line. The lights went out, and Nikki started to grind. Castle started spinning, or maybe it was my brain. I can't tell you what you did to me, but my body will never be the same. Loving will kick you behind. She'll show you no mercy, but she'll shout up, show you how to grind. Woke up the next morning, Nikki wasn't there. I looked all over and all I found was a phone number on the stairs. It said, thank you for a funky time. Call me up whenever you wanna grind.
Tipper Gore was not the only public guardian that we've seen in the last 20 years. What Tipper was to the 1980s, C. Dolores Tucker, the head of the National Political Congress of Black Women, and William Bennett, George W. Bush's drug czar, were to the 1990s. Their focus was rap and hip-hop, especially gangsta rap. They were later joined by two Democrats, Joseph Lieberman and Sam Nunn, who ratcheted up the rhetoric by also targeting dope-smoking bands like the Black Crowes and Blues Travelers, and anyone of a variety of ecstasy-driven dance club acts. Here in the 21st century, we have Brent Bozell. Brent is the head of something called the Media Research Center and the Parents Television Council. Bozell is also the former finance chairman for Pat Buchanan, the ultra-right-wing Republican who has run for president a couple of times. Let me give you a quote from Mr. Bozell. The entertainment industry wraps itself around the adage that it's only reflecting reality, and therefore they are the messenger, not the message. But sometimes reality is so awful, it would be welcome for them not to reflect it. Mr. Bozell's critics have pointed out that if his guidelines and philosophies were in place 400 years ago, almost none of Shakespeare's plays would have been allowed to be performed. Mr. Bozell and his followers may not be able to do anything about Shakespeare, but they sure can do something about that damn Janet Jackson and her pasty-covered breast at the 2004 Super Bowl. Now, I'm sorry about this, but I have to do a little editorial here. Americans have no trouble showing all manner of violence and gunplay on primetime TV, but they freak out over one little pasty-covered breast? I don't get it. But let's not put all the blame on just Janet. Truth be told, this backlash against indecency really began with our man Bono and his acceptance speech at the 2003 Golden Globe Awards, where he described U2's win as effing brilliant on live TV. Now, at first, Bono was let off the hook because the U.S. Federal Communications Commission determined that in this context, the F word was used as an adjective. Let me quote you the ruling. The material aired during the Golden Globe Awards program does not describe or depict sexual or excretory activities and organs. The word may be crude and offensive, but in the context presented here, did not describe sexual or excretory organs or activities. Rather, the performer used the word as an adjective or expletive to emphasize an exclamation. Indeed, in similar circumstances, we have found that offensive language used as an insult rather than as a description of sexual or excretory activity or organs is not within the scope of the Commission's prohibition of indecent program content. That decision, however, sparked quite the outcry, and the FCC was forced to backpedal, introducing a new series of huge fines, up to $3 million, by the way, for broadcasters who allowed the transmission of indecent material. Less than 2 weeks after those measures were passed, Janet had her famous wardrobe malfunction, and things haven't been the same since. So, while most people blame Janet's boob, the real genesis of this new indecency crisis was Bono of U2 when he accepted the Golden Globe Award for this song from the Martin Scorsese movie The Gangs of New York. And notice the irony in the title. It's called The Hands That Built America.
Oh, my love, it's a long way we've come from the freckled hills to the steel and glass canyons, from the stony fields to hanging steel from sky, from digging in our pockets for a reason and to say goodbye. These are the hands that built America. I saw your face in a watercolor sky, as seabirds argue a long goodbye. I took your kiss on the spray of the new line star. You gotta live with your dreams, don't make them so hard. And these are the hands that built America. Is this one we could keep? Of all of the dreams, is this one still out of reach?
Back with some final words on the fear of music, right after this.
You're tuned to the ongoing history of new music. This is the ongoing history of new music.
The issue of censorship is a really tricky one. As we've seen over the last two shows, what is indecent to one person is free speech and artistic expression to another. What is a reflection of societal change to one group is a threat to the status quo to another. And rather than listen to the message, the messenger is attacked. And the rules are always changing. What was acceptable a few years ago is now completely forbidden, and vice versa. The line between indecency and acceptable is big, fat, and gray. And it keeps shifting to the left and to the right, sometimes rather suddenly and for unexpected reasons. Now, the reasons all this happens are, well, it's really, really complicated. They have to do with demographics and politics and economics and more. People have written thousands upon thousands of pages on this area of societal evolution. And here's a final comment coming from someone who has been doing radio for a long, long time. It's weird how people change as they get older. A lot of people have quietly become just like their parents. 10 years ago, if I played a song on the radio with the dirty words bleeped out, tons of people would have called to complain, saying that we were violating the artist's vision and the integrity of the music. Today, if I play that very same song, uncensored, those same people who had called to complain 10 years ago now call to complain that I shouldn't do this because I have children and they shouldn't hear language like that. We have to protect the children. It's kind of wild how the fear of music sets in as you get older. Technical Productions by Rob Johnston. I'm Alan Cross.
You've been listening to The Ongoing History of New Music, a Deep Sky production.